So welcome to our second book club. I'm really excited. This is the only book club where you don't have to read the book and you don't have to wear pants. I hope it's the only book club where you don't have to wear pants. I don't know what other book clubs do. You guys know me. I'm a career engagement coach. I love to help people love their jobs. And I wanted to start a book club that basically explores what does it mean to be happy at work. So I kind of mashed up all the things that I love, like reading and awesome people and exploring what it means to like your job into one little package. And I'm still figuring out exactly what that package is, but I'm so glad that there are awesome people to come and explore that with me. So today we've got Hilarie Mae, who some of you know, some of you don't know, some of you are going to get to know. She was one of the first people I met when I moved to this area, and we were talking, and like, she just is so multifaceted and has so many interesting things going on. And like, every time we talk or I Google her, I find out some new interesting part of her. So I'm not gonna try to summarize what you do or what your journey has been, because I will not do it justice. So why don't we kick off with like a 10,000 foot view of your professional journey thus far?
Sure. I read that question when you prepped me, and I love it. I think that's such a genius question. So so I went to college and got 2 degrees. And I already had in my head when I graduated that I was going to start studying energy medicine. And I already knew that I was going to study healing touch specifically. So as soon as I graduated, and I had an undergrad degree in women and gender studies and interpersonal and organizational communication, and a master's degree in interpersonal and organizational communication and rhetorical theory. It's a lot of words, so I
well done.
Do it quick. Like a tongue twister. And so I started training with energy work as soon as I got out of college. But in the meantime, I needed a job. And, you know, as I was reflecting on this for this conversation, and I have to say, like, they were bridge jobs, right? Jobs that were just going to carry me over until I could be in business for myself. But they were amazing. They were amazing jobs. And they were like, they probably don't look amazing from the outside, like they're kind of whatever jobs. But they were with really incredible people at really incredible places. And I just, like, looking back, I just felt so incredibly blessed to have landed in them. So the first one, I was hired by an outsourcing company to do records management at an intellectual property law firm. Which, like, had nothing to do with anything I knew about, had nothing, like, was not of interest to me, was just like, whatever, right? They're going to pay me and I'm going to get to, like, sit in a basement and mess around with files and whatever, right? I can spend all my time, like, training and honing my craft and whatever, right? So I take this job, and I discovered that the people I'm really working for, right, the attorneys at this law firm, are probably the most amazing group of individuals that I've ever come across in my life, all rounded up in one space. And, like, even as I was thinking about it, like, I could almost cry. They were such incredible people. And every single one of them, you know, like, a lot of times when you're in a group, you find, like, there are a couple that you don't really jive with, or, like, they're kind of duds, right? As is the way, like, you don't love everybody. I can honestly say, like, I loved every single one of them. And so it was such a pleasure to be in that environment. And especially an environment that, like, these people were so intelligent and so driven, and also had so much integrity, that it was a really interesting combination, right? To have people that were that ambitious and that driven and that capable, and also that, like, compassionate, all rolled into one. And that was a really beautiful thing to see and be part of. So they eventually hired me to be the most unqualified paralegal in the whole entire world. No training in being a paralegal, no interest in being a paralegal. Like, my sister's an attorney, and her and I both know, like, being a lawyer is at the very bottom of my list as far as my own profession goes. So we've always kind of joked about this, that somehow I ended up as a paralegal at this law firm, and flamed out of that job in about 3 months because it was like more stress and pressure than I've ever had to handle in my entire life. Because if you mess up one little thing on a patent, right, which is their primary work, right, you can cost a client millions or even billions of dollars. So, like, a typo is a huge deal. So that was not for me. And I felt so sad to leave them because, I loved them, those people, so much, but it was just not the job for me. So I had a very epic, like, come to Jesus moment with the head attorney. So he was in charge of all the attorneys, and I cried in his office. And he was like, "Okay, Hilarie, like, we love you, but we get it. Like, can you please just, like, try to make yourself look a little bit better, or people are going to think I made you cry. Like, just, like, get it together before you go outside." I was like, okay, I get it. That's fair. So literally on my walk out after that, kind of epic ending, I get a call from the first company that originally hired me, offering me a position at their corporate office, even though they didn't know that I was quitting my job, which just to me is like miraculous. So I said yes to that, and I took that job and had the pleasure of working under their CFO, which was really cool because I'm not a money person or a finance person. And that is like, he thinks in numbers, not in words. And it was such an awesome exposure to that. And there was an expectation that I would do some of that work, which is another, like, I was ridiculously unqualified for that. But he hired me anyways, and we got along famously, and we're still buddies. We still stay in touch, and he's probably old enough to be my grandfather. But he was just an amazing mentor and got money in a way that I had never been around anyone who had that relationship with money before, that knowledge of money before. So that was really interesting. Then I hopped over to be a wellness director at an independent grocery store simultaneously. So at one point I had my business. I worked as a supervisor at this grocery store, and I was working a full-time job at this other company. So that was like probably the craziest time in my life. I worked 80 hours a week. I like barely had time to eat. It was crazy.
How long was that?
So that was for the overlap of all of that was like 6 months, which is, I still have no idea. I feel like I blacked out during that time, and I don't know how I made it through that. But eventually worked just at the grocery store and just at my business, and then ended at the grocery store and was just in my business. So it was a very like gentle kind of coast into owning my own business. And I've been doing that now full time for 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, something like that.
And what about like the boudoir photography and the being a doula? Like, where do those parts come in?
Yeah. So I trained to be a doula when I was in college, and I did that kind of on and off for friends and stuff throughout basically that whole entire time. I haven't had a client in the last couple of years, but all before that I had like, I don't know, 1 or 2 a year just for fun. So I've had the rare pleasure of being at some of my best friends' births, which is super cool. And I also think that was something that kind of triggered in me this desire to like be in a really empowered relationship with my body, right? Because I watched them experience this and I was like, holy shit. Like, I don't, you know, she's talking about like how her cervix feels. And I was like, I don't know what my cervix feels like, you know, like it was stuff like that just sort of made me think and kind of tripped that in me. And I have a long trauma history, like through my childhood and adolescence. And that made me like really disassociate from my body. And so, I think it was in 2013, I started exploring the idea of boudoir photography. So does everybody know what that is? No. Okay.
Tell us.
So
someone won't know.
Yeah, sure. So boudoir photography is basically like erotic photography that you participate in. So like women wear lingerie or sometimes they wear nothing. But it's a very, like it's not really meant for public consumption and it's not created from that standpoint, right? Like you commission a boudoir photographer and you hire them to take a series of these like erotic photos of you. And some women like put them in a book and give them to their significant other as a gift, or they keep them just for themselves. But the whole idea and why I started to pursue it was like, I wanted to see my body through a lens because I knew that how I was seeing it for myself wasn't really accurate. And it was really hard for me to be embodied. And like, when someone told me I was beautiful, like that wouldn't even register. Like I couldn't even hear that. And so I was like, well, I would like to see myself as if I'm outside looking in, because the inside, clearly I can't get there yet. Right. So I'm going to go from the outside in. And so I did a full year of boudoir photography where I had a boudoir photo shoot once a month for 12 months. And it was really interesting to experience the progression of that. And I blogged about it the whole time and posted the photos. So somewhere on the internet, if you Google me, you can definitely find me naked. For sure. And that was like a really big leap for me. And I mean, I've never been shy. Like that's, you know, I've never had any trouble kind of putting myself out there, but this was out there in a very different way. And it was, what was most fascinating to me was like the evolution of, you know, I started and I was freaking out, right? My first day, I was freaking out. And there was so much like mental trash talk happening in my head of like, this is so stupid. Why would you do this? This isn't going to accomplish anything. You're disgusting, like on and on and on and on and on, right? In this crazy loop. Mm-hmm. And, you know, by month 10, 11, and 12, like I was actually excited.
Cool.
Right? I was like, bring it on. This is so amazing. Like, I can't wait until I can get in front of the camera. Like I actually craved it. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting to watch that evolution. And it did exactly what I had kind of intended it to do, was to help me be embodied.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like an amazing healing experience.
It was. And, you know, I don't recommend it for everybody because that's not everyone's jam.
Here's my prescription.
But it's really like, I have recommended it to a whole bunch of clients, and even just do one, right? You know, just do it for a year. Like that was very specific and intentional on my part, but like do one and see what it feels like, right? Do one and play, like approach it as an experiment and just like be free and see what happens.
Interesting.
Yeah. I recommend that for every person, man or woman. I think it's an incredible experience.
My mom had boudoir photography done when she turned 50.
I love that.
Well, I just remembered this is being recorded, so I'll tell a version of the because I don't want to put her on blast. But let's just say for some reason for Christmas, she gave us all a picture from her boudoir.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I've always thought about like hanging mine, right? Like getting it
Yeah.
like blown, like blowing some of them up and putting them on a wall. But I feel
She
like
hung them
everyone who
all
would
over
come
my
into
dad's
my apartment.
office.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing.
So you've got so many threads and so much positivity, and you've taken so
A lot
much
of
from so many
threads.
different parts of your life. How have they all what's the common thread, or what's the rope that they've been woven into? Or I don't know. Save me from this question.
Well, I think there are two things that come to mind. One is I've never been a very conventional person. I internally have not had a very conventional experience. And, you know, I've always kind of found a way around the system or a way to not follow certain rules. And I think that has served me incredibly well, no matter what I was doing, right? No matter what I was pursuing, no matter what I was in the midst of. Somebody, and this is probably a famous quote, but I don't know who said it. At some point, I was exposed to this idea of there's always a third way, right? So we live in a very binary culture where there's this way or there's this way, right? And it's about creating that division and having a right or a wrong or a left or a right, right? And I don't believe that. I just don't believe that that's true. And I think that there's always a third way, there's always a fourth way, there's always a 10th way if we're willing to open ourselves up. If we're willing to open ourselves up to the possibilities, and that might not look like what we think it's going to look like, right? My life definitely doesn't look like how I thought it was going to look. And I think it hardly ever does, right? And the sooner we can embrace that instead of resisting it, the easier everything gets, and the more fun everything gets, and the more creative everything gets, and the more energized everything gets. So, and I guess that's kind of how I've tried to live, whether it was conscious or unconscious at the time.
Okay, that answered my question, because I was remembering you were saying you kind of always wanted to run your own business. You were always going into this kind of business.
Yeah. And, you know, there were moments all along the journey where like I wanted to do something else, right? Like I wanted to be a professional doula, or I wanted to be a college professor, or I wanted to, you know, I don't know, right? There were probably 20 other things in there somewhere, but like I kind of always knew that my trajectory was to be in that like really independent space of owning my own business. So yeah.
Awesome.
Can I record this?
It's being recorded, and it will be available on YouTube. You can record it for yourself as well if you'd like to, but it also is being recorded from the beginning.
Okay.
So what was I going to ask you? Oh, so you're this immensely positive person with this immensely positive take on like everything that's happened to you.
Yeah.
I'm
Kind of.
curious. Let me have my fantasy of you. I'm curious, do you have like long dark nights of the soul when you're like, what am I doing with my life? And if so, how do you deal with those?
So less about what am I doing with my life, because I now very firmly reside in the belief and the understanding that I'm collaborating with life, right? And that's perfect, and it is exactly what it is all the time, right? And it's okay all the time. That being said, so I was on, and still on, right, a really long healing journey, right? And so, but what's interesting is that I'm also a healer in the process of being that, right? There's an awesome book, if anybody is, you know, like perks up at this, called The Wounded Healer, right? And it's basically how we serve in our imperfection.
I think that's perfect. There's a lot of coaches who are going to watch this call. So
it's an awesome book, because how often do we get tripped up with like, well, I'm not done fixing this with myself, so how could I possibly help somebody else, right, as they're on their journey? And I think that's just a tremendous fallacy, right? We serve wherever we are, and the people who need us will be served by that, right? And that's always evolving. So, but yes, absolutely, dark nights of the soul. of course. And what that experience has been like for me is I'm a very mystical person, and I have a lot of like I can lucid dream, and I have a lot of very intense inner experiencing and multidimensional spiritual experiencing. And that has been such a tremendous gift for me, because it's allowed me to move through different levels of myself and move through different levels of my life, right? So that one level of my life can be really deeply serving at a given time while I'm still healing or processing something in a different level. And that's not to say that there aren't moments when I'm all in, right, in a particular endeavor. But I think for me, that's how I've been able to continue serving others outside of myself and creating an external life while still doing my own inner work and kind of being in that almost relentless state of healing. So yeah, does that answer your question? Oh, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. Really on the ball tonight. Like the ball's in the next room.
That's okay. We love you anyway.
So I was saying that's a beautiful answer.
Oh, thanks.
Question. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I'm curious, and I think you probably touched on it a little bit, but when did this book cross your path?
So Women and Gender Studies was so I started taking college classes when I was 16 at community college. That's when I thought I wanted to be a social worker. There's another career that never transpired.
More chapters to the book.
Yeah. And so being in that study realm in that school was what got me interested in women and gender studies. And so when I transferred to get a 4-year degree, that's what I found, a program that would allow me to be in women and gender studies. And I went to Brockport, if anybody has heard of that. It's a SUNY school in New York, in Western New York, outside of Rochester. And I was incredibly, incredibly lucky that I was in, it was kind of like a new program. So it hadn't been there for a really long time. And because of that, they afforded us a lot of freedom and flexibility to kind of like do whatever the fuck we wanted to do. So, and had it been really well established, there would have been much clearer, like now, even if you look at the program, it has much clearer like lines of study. And I got to do whatever I wanted to do, which was such a gift. And so as we were learning about all these different kinds of feminism, which is a whole topic in and of itself, there was one particular kind of feminism, which was radical cultural feminism, which really resonated with me. And so I was studying communication in the communication program, and I was studying women's studies over here. And one of my professors said, "Hey, you should read this book." And, now here's Hilarie from her like good Catholic girl upbringing. And so she hands me this book called Cunt, and I'm like, okay.
By the way, I checked. We're cool to say cunt on YouTube. We're allowed to post.
And so I kind of like danced around it a little bit. I was almost like hesitant to read it. And then I started reading it, and I just wanted to eat that book. Like I just wanted to like consume it all because it was so amazing. And I felt like she was talking to me, and I was like, these are all things that I felt and all things that I've kind of had in my mind before. And she's articulating them all. Like she's saying them all so unapologetically in such an uncensored way. So like you feel like you're sitting with someone who is so intelligent and so irreverent, like in her living room. And I was like, why don't more feminists talk like this? Like, why don't more people talk like this? Like, why don't we just say what we mean instead of this like politically correct politeness? And so it was really interesting. And it was the first kind of piece of writing that I feel like broke down some stuff, right? Like actually started to crumble some of those
Hilarie,
things.
I just want to highlight that the book is called Cunt, and you just said that you wanted to eat the book.
Yeah.
I just want to put it out there. Awesome.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. And I think that's like the author would even say that like that's how we should feel about it, right? Like when we hear truth, right? That part of our anatomy even, right? That's our truth. That's the truth of who we are. And we should want to eat it. We should want to taste it. We should want to consume it.
My
right?
dad,
Because
my dad overheard me and he's like,
what is going on?
Yeah, totally. So that's how it first kind of came onto the scene. And because it's both like philosophical and practical, there were a lot of things she talks about in the book that I started doing and experimenting with, which was a lot of fun. So it's definitely kind of stayed in my life just from like a practical guidebook kind of standpoint.
Completely within your own level of comfort. What experiments?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, so the first thing I tried was I ditched all my regular pads, right? So I no longer use pads or tampons, right? Which is awesome. And I started to figure out like what actually works for me, right? If I'm not going to use those products, what does work for me? So that took a little trying. And I ended up like not only using a menstrual cup, but also I made my own pads because they're the only ones at the time that I could find that were organic. Right. So I didn't even want fabric that wasn't organic. So now you can buy them organic. And lunapads.com is an awesome resource. They are really badass Canadian women.
Woohoo! Gotta love badass Canadian women.
And they have a really great, like, it's not a money-making business for them. I mean, I'm sure it does make them money, but they are very political as well. Like they have a really strong ideology and a really strong stance. So I love them to pieces.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that was one of them, but
I got the same inspiration. So
yeah,
I got my first cap this month.
Sure. There you go.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book, and I'm surprised that at this age, this is the first time I've ever heard anybody say to me like, "Oh yeah, figure out what's right for you."
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that to me, that's the most important thing that she talks about, right? Like cunt aside, anatomy aside, sexuality aside, right? Like all of that, feminism aside, right? What she's saying here is like, figure out what works for you, right? And think critically about what doesn't, right? Like if there's something that you feel like is off in your life, don't just accept that, right? Like don't numb out and just take that as it is what it is. Like think critically about it, wonder, be curious, and experiment, right? Be in that space of curiosity and figure out what works for you so that you can live your freest, your most empowered life.
I loved the connection she made to expert addiction and sort of the way we're taught about our bodies and our periods and sort of as this other thing, and how as women that keeps showing up in our lives is sort of always looking for that expert to tell us how we should relate to fill in the blank.
Yeah, right. Everything. Everything.
It's literally, it's highlighted and post-it noted. I like that.
Yeah, I think so. I actually, the quote that I pulled out was about that, right? It's about how not just with our bodies, but with everything, we look outside ourselves, right? And we're taught to do that, right? We're taught to seek outside rather than saying like, how do I actually feel about this? And like, if I spend time with myself for a minute, right? If I hold this question or this thing that feels out of alignment, maybe an answer will rise to the surface. That's my own answer, right? That comes from my own wisdom, that's self-powered, that's not being told to me based on someone else's opinion, knowledge, expertise, whatever. Yeah. And I think that's so true. And I think we forget it a lot. Like, I mean, this is like half my job and I still forget it. So, you know, we live in a culture that very seductively calls us outside of ourselves, right? It's a powerful, powerful voice and set of voices that calls us outside of ourselves. But there's something really powerful and life altering about seeking your answers inside first. And that's not to say that you can't go find answers, right? Because of course there are answers, and of course we need external input sometimes, right? But when you start with yourself, right? When you're the first expert that you consult, that's a totally different life experience with basically everything.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, well, we're about to switch into the portion of general conversation. So
you're right on time.
Why don't you kick us off, Carrie?
Well, I think just what you just said is so interesting because I've done some work around women's leadership and confidence issues. It just hit on a really big issue, which is women's tendency to feel that they need more and more and more training, experts to turn to before they're confident doing whatever it is that they're doing. And, you know, often that's compared to how men approach things. And they say that women often need to be 100% sure that they know a body of information before they put themselves out there as being knowledgeable or able to do something. Whereas men often are just so much more comfortable if they know, 50, 60% of the body of knowledge. They're like, yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
And so this trusting ourselves is so important. So thank you for bringing that up. That was really interesting.
For sure. And I think that I love what you said about trainings because, a lot of the people I work with tend to be entrepreneurs. And so, of course we can always be in a state of learning new things, right? In any profession, right? Of course we can always be bettering ourselves. And, I noticed that a lot of the women that I work with, I've actually had a few that were prospects, right? Who were thinking about working with me. And they said, well, I just finished up basically like 8 years of studying. And I want to take this one last training before I work with you. And I say like, well, if I can give you one thing, it would be to examine why you feel like you have to take that one more training, like not to work with me, like go do whatever you want to do, but why do you think after you've been studying for the last 10 years in something that if you take this one more training, something's going to be different? Right?
Well, it's really important to recognize the difference of lifelong learning, which is really important.
For sure.
And this issue around confidence. And I think we get them mixed up. I know I do.
Totally. Right. And I think there's a difference between, I'm going to put everything on hold, right, while I train, while I learn, rather than having them be intertwined.
Right.
Like when we stop being in our life, when we stop contributing and we stop serving or we stop, we silence ourselves because we want to learn more first, right? Versus having that learning just be in the mix, right? Because it is, right? When we show up, we're learning all the time. Yeah. And I think that's so important to make that distinction.
It's both like an artificial barrier that we set up. Like I have to know this much or do this much or be this good before I'm allowed to participate. And it's also like a safety zone. Like I don't have to worry about, putting together my business because I'm just going to take this other training.
Right. I can put this off indefinitely if I just stay in trainings forever. Yeah.
Sharon, did you want to say something? No, you just wanted to type something in the chat?
It was because she was saying that women feel like they need more training, and that specific example, I felt like she felt inadequate. That's all. Yeah, I don't feel like talking.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I think that's the word for it, right?
Mhm.
Like if we, or that lack of confidence, right? That inadequacy can silence people a lot.
Actually, I have a question about the cup that you guys were talking about. I came in late, so I'm kind of lost. Like the menstrual cup?
Do you want to know like what brand I use? Is that the question?
Like, how does it stay there?
Oh,
Surprisingly large.
yeah, and it doesn't, it really doesn't move actually at all. Like there's like suction almost that's created when you put it in. And so it doesn't like slide around or move at all. It actually stays very stationary.
So it's inside?
Mhm.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Like you insert it
Deb,
like you
you're
would insert a
muted.
tampon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you use that because it's safer, like more organic?
Yep. And the primary thing, the primary reason to use it as opposed to something like a tampon is that the lining of your vaginal walls gets absorbed into your tampon in the same way that menstrual fluid does. And that messes with the natural ecology, right? So if you put in something that's medical grade silicone,
Okay.
it's not absorbing that, right? It's just catching the menstrual fluid. So you're not actually disrupting the natural ecology of that,
Got it.
which is what toxic shock syndrome is,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can avoid it through
Cool.
that. At least that's what the research says. I'm not an expert.
And you would, I'll learn about it on my own time.
And I can send you the brand I like.
Okay.
I can message that too.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. We'll send it out with the video.
Yeah.
We'll link.
You can just link to that.
We'll have a little like image of your face going like next to the brand. Would be perfect.
I actually do have a photograph of like me holding it up. Not gonna lie.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did you want to read the quote? I know you kind of summarized it, but totally
yeah,
up.
sure.
I asked Hilarie to pick a part of the book she wanted to share, just in case people haven't had a chance to read it yet, because it is optional.
Yeah, totally. So this one, I have the ebook, so it's not going to be the same as if you have a paper copy. But she says, in this society, we look to the outside for just about everything: love, entertainment, well-being, self-worth, and health. We stare into the TV set instead of speaking of our own dreams, wait for a vacation instead of appreciating each day, watch the clock rather than listening to our hearts. And that to me just is such like a clear summary of that external facing attention, right? And even for something that, right, like well-being, that seems to be something that is so internal, right? That's something we create. And yet we pursue that outside of ourselves. So that quote just stuck out to me. And I pulled one other that is the connection to words, because like so much of what I do relates to words. And so much of our reality relates to words. And it's super quick. And she says, words outlive people, institutions, civilizations. Words spur images, associations, memories, inspirations, and synapse pulsations. Words send off physical resonations of thought into the nether sphere. Words hurt, soothe, inspire, demean, demand, incite, pacify, teach, romance, pervert, unite, divide. Words be powerful. And I just love that, because I think that that's a way that every single person can shift into a more empowered life, right? Like that's how everyone, whether you want to switch how you handle your period or not, like that is such a fundamental way that we can change our way of being, right? Is when we change our words, when we change our thoughts, when we change the words we use with other people. That has such a profound impact, right? Because words create our world, right? They create the reality that we live in. So I just love that she kind of prefaced everything that she was saying, right? Like, here are all my radical ideas, but what it comes down to is this, right? How conscious we are of this.
I love that.
Right? Me too. Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions? I don't want to not give people a chance to talk.
Or thoughts, reflections, or maybe you're just really excited to read the book.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this book just about the vagina, basically, and confidence? I'm sorry, Daddy. Or like, what else will be in the book that's something important to touch on, like sexuality or something?
Yeah. So sexuality definitely gets touched on, but a huge part of the book is actually about how we support each other, right? So it's actually about community, and like in part activism, and in part like just how you are day to day with other people. She talks a lot about that. She talks a lot about what it means to support other people, what it means to be a friend, what it means to support yourself. So yeah, she does talk a lot about like how we take care of ourselves physically and being sexually empowered, and just being physically empowered. But she also talks a ton about like, what does it mean for us to support each other? And what does that look like actually in day to day? And she has like a manifesto in the book, which when I read it for the first time ever, I was in college. And so one of the lines in it is like it's self-protection or it's empowerment. Like when you see a drunk girl walk out of a bar and you follow her to make sure that she gets into her cab okay, right? Like that's part of what it means to just be human, right? Like show up and be real and pay attention and be compassionate and watch out for a woman that like you don't know. She's not your friend. She didn't go to the bar with you, but like she's your sister, right? Like she's another human being on this planet that like might need a little help in that moment, or just somebody to have her back, right? And so, you know, I was living in a college town at the time, and I was like, shoot, how many times have I seen a drunk girl walk out of a bar and like not given it a second thought? And that was a real kind of eye-opening moment for me personally when I read that, because I was like, we can care for each other so much better than we are, right? We can show up for each other so much better than we are, and so much better than we're taught to, right? Like part of that isn't necessarily our fault. It's that we've been conditioned to isolate, right? We've been conditioned to in that kind of individualistic mindset. And it takes some effort to step out of that, right? It takes some effort to show up and be conscious of the people around you and like who actually needs your help, who actually needs somebody to have their back in this moment. And if you have the capacity for that, can you do it? So she talks a lot about that, right? And speaks a lot about community as well, which I think kind of goes hand in hand. And I love that discussion. So that's a whole other part of the book. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, cool.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Tell me a little bit more about radical cultural feminism.
Ooh. So, within feminism, there are a whole bunch of different types, right? There are a whole bunch of different types of feminists and feminisms. And some of, you know, which I kind of take issue with a little bit, because I think at times it makes the whole concept of feminism weaker, right? Because it tends to be a little fractured. But what we see, the feminists that we see, tend to be the activists, right? The ones who are outspoken, the ones who are articulate, the ones who are on news shows, the ones who tweet constantly, like that's the feminism that we see, right? And I never really felt like I wanted to dive into that, because I felt like that would be my job, right? If I did start identifying with that, like that could be a full-time job. And that's not what I wanted my full-time job to be. And so I heard about radical cultural feminists in a class on feminist theory. And so it's basically the idea that, so radical cultural feminists believe that men and women are different, right? As opposed to the feminists that are for a more like everybody's the same, right? We're all the same. And that's okay. Like to each their own. I'm not disparaging any belief, but I heard that like men and women are different, and that makes us all awesome. Is basically what that is, that radical cultural feminist perspective is saying, like, our differences actually make us all incredible, right? It makes men incredible. It makes women incredible when we can figure out how to leverage that, right? When we can be all of who we are without trying to fit into another gender identity, without trying to make it in a man's world. Like, we can do things differently, and that is also incredibly powerful, right? So we get to decide where we assign the power, right? And how we live the power, rather than saying like, oh, these people doing life this way have power, so I'm going to try to blend with that, right? I'm going to try to make that my way of being. So radical cultural feminists say, create your own power, right? Like, do life your own way and draw power into that, be the power in that. And I really loved that, because I don't like following the rules. And right, so that perspective is basically like, you can be powerful anywhere, right? You being you is more powerful than you following a rule.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Very
sure.
helpful.
It was really fun to stumble upon that, and there's some really interesting writing on that too. I'm gonna name drop another book, and it's called Radical Homemaking.
Ooh.
And it's a really fun book, and she doesn't identify herself as a radical cultural feminist, but that's what she is, right? And so it's a fun read, and it's a very unconventional read about like how she lives her life, basically. So yeah,
Hilarie's recommended reading list will be coming out with the
yeah. Apparently there are a lot of them.
Sounds like that would be a really good wedding gift.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. It totally would. Are you kidding? As would cunt, to be perfectly honest. Right?
Anybody going to a wedding?
Oh my God, the next wedding I go to, that's totally going to be my present.
Here's some books, a little reading, and a cup.
I'm showing my age, but I don't think I could give it to my son right now.
Maybe for the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, Hilarie.
Yeah.
I have a question that is inspired by Saratoga Springs. I went up there today, and I noticed that there's good people there, but some girls tend to be a bit catty. So even though, I approached and I was friendly and I was trying to be social and make friends, they kind of have like this, a little bit of a, I don't want to generalize, but a bit of a stuck up attitude. So what would you say to that? How to get their defenses down so they're not so guarded or they're not so catty?
Sure. Well,
or do you just leave it?
I don't know. I think there are a few ways to approach that. One, I would say don't change your way of being in those situations, right? Like, don't play off of their cattiness and adjust according to that, right? Like, show up and be whoever you are in that moment, right? Like, show up and be you in that moment. But part of what we experience, I think, as women is that what enables, patriarchy, if you want to call it that, to continue is that women hold each other down.
Yeah.
Right? And that is systemic, right? We've seen that all throughout modern history. And so this is my way of handling this, which is not necessarily for everyone, but I'm a bit of a rebel, and I actually feel pretty confident in those situations to call it out. Right?
I'm listening.
Right? Like, head on, name that shit. Like, don't, rather than like trying to like find a way to like smooth into it, right? Or take their defenses down, like, call it out. Right? And you don't have to, like, it doesn't have to be called out in the spirit of judgment, right? Like, look at what you're doing. I can't believe you're doing this, right? It doesn't have to be like that. It can just be like, hey, what I'm experiencing right now is you being like unwelcoming and catty, and it hurts my feelings. Right? Like, just drop some like really honest talk into that. That's my personal way of handling that. So I can't speak to every situation, but I've said that multiple times. And a lot of times what happens is that immediately diffuses that, because every woman knows that feeling, right? Every woman has experienced that feeling in one situation or another, with one group of people or another. And so I think rather than trying to like combat it, it's a reminder of like, do you remember when you felt like this? Do you remember when a whole group of catty bitches did this to you? Right? Like, let's not do that right now. Let's not do that right now, because I don't want to dislike you, and I don't want to feel at odds with you. And that doesn't mean we have to be best friends, but like, let's call this what it is. So that's my very direct way of handling that. And it's got me into some really interesting discussions, right? Because inevitably, like, there's some like, oh God, like, what? There's some discomfort around this of like, you just said something and that makes me feel really vulnerable. And, you know, like, it brings stuff up. And I've gotten into some really awesome conversations as a result of that. And I've also pissed some people off, which that's okay. Like, if that's where you're at and you can't take that in and you don't want to hear that, that's okay. Like, we're not going to relate right now. And that's okay. So yeah, that's my thought.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So does anybody have like a final question or thought they want to share? Shall I play us out?
Do you have music?
I will in the video. I was like, if copyright wasn't an issue, there's so many song suggestions in this book. I was like,
oh, right.
Soundtrack.
Oh my God.
Make your own music then.
It'll be a while before the video comes out. If I do.
Just start singing. Like, na, 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 na.
Just do like the Batman noise, especially with his voice.
Your thing out. She'll do it.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I'll tell you when, Karen, and then I'll lay it over.
Sounds good.
So the video is going to come out with all the links we've mentioned, with Hilarie's website. But if you do want to get a hold of Hilarie in order to tap into your entrepreneurial power or your relationship with yourself, her website is hilariemay.com, and that will be in the video all spelled out, because last time I tried to spell it, I just messed up the whole thing. So it's going to be at the bottom.
Wrong. It's okay.
It'll be at the bottom. Or if you want to work with me to explore how your career can be more meaningful or motivating or feel more valuable, I'm Michelle Krasny. I'm at michellekrasny.com. Also will be written on the bottom. And not next month, but the month after, we're taking a breather in March. So on April 22nd at 4 p.m., we have a guest who I'm really excited about. Her name is Lindy Wilkins, and she teaches wearable technology in Toronto at OCAD University and Ryerson University. And she's super interesting. Like, her whole mantra is, how can she get more technology and more robots onto people's bodies? So she's super interesting, has like a ton of accolades. Those will come out with like the next Eventbrite invite. But I wanted to tell a story. We met when I was in Toronto recently for coffee, and we were talking about like what she's up to. And I was like, do you consider yourself a generalist or a specialist? And she said, I don't even know how to answer that question. I just see something and I get really interested in it, and I just like put all my energy and time into it until I'm done. for instance, right now I'm really interested in spacesuits. And I was like, okay, tell me more. And she said, okay, so for instance, this is very on topic. The first time a woman went into space, the guys were like packing up her stuff and she was on her period and they were like, you're going up for a week. How many tampons do you need? Like 100? And they were very concerned that she was going to have issues with gravity and all the blood was going to go up into her body. They said, all the blood's going to go up into your body and you're going to die. And the female astronauts were like, no, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's not a gravity related process. Anyway, she's got a lot of good stories. Also, apparently there's like 80 or 800 bags of poop on the moon because they didn't bring it back. I can't remember if it's 80 or 800. There's bags of poop on the moon. So she's going to join us. The book she picked is called The Cyborg's Manifesto. It's actually like an article that's online. And we're going to talk about haptic technology and wearable tech and what crazy things she's up to in the world. So yeah, thank you all for coming. This was awesome.